to First Strike here on VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross. Going to break down an intriguing card this weekend at UFC Apex here in Las Vegas coming up on Saturday night. To help me do that, of course, Lou Finocchiaro is standing by. Dan Vreeland's going to join us. Reed Kuhn and Britton Hess all on the lineup today. A star-studded affair, as always, as we do each and every Tuesday here on First Strike. Let's get out to the man you can follow on Twitter, as I do, at Gamblue. He is Lou Finocchiaro, the host of the Bout Business Podcast. Lou, very quickly, a very interesting UFC 284 that wrapped up over the weekend down under in Australia. What were your takeaways from it, my friend, and how did you fare on the main event?
Well, first of all, Dave, this is a great, exciting show early in the week. Loved the format. Thanks for having me on. 84 was great. We win a few ducats. We lose a unit on Volkanovski, but you know what? The handicap was correct.
Yes.
He gave Makhachev everything he wanted and more. I think the aura around Makhachev is now lifted, and Volkanovski has options. Makhachev also saves face, wins a very close decision, and we all walk off, I guess, better because we got to see two great athletes compete for 25 full minutes.
Yeah, the pound-for-pound battle was up there. Some people thought that Volk won it on the cards. Obviously, Islam does maintain that 155-pound strap, but I thought your handicap was right on. And for an over $3 betting underdog in Volk, certainly got your money's worth for 5 dynamic rounds down under. Let's get to this card out here at UFC Apex this weekend. And obviously, you look at Andrade against Blanchfield here in the main event. Erin, right now, a small underdog here. I'm seeing about a plus $1.35 on Tuesday against Andrade, a former champion at 115, now fighting it here at 125 pounds. Minus $1.65 for Andrade, plus $1.40 here on Blanchfield here at DraftKings. What do you make of this potential 5-round main event?
Well, it's fascinating in that it's short notice for Andrade, and really even more so than for Blanchfield, who's originally the young Blanchfield, gal 23, a dynamo, and really on the fast track to a title. She's originally going to face Talia Santos, a slight but longer, leaner athlete, and then in short notice, Santos can't get her trainers to get visas. And so Andrade, who is just a bulldog crossed with a buzzsaw, steps in on short notice after she completely dismantles Lauren Murphy a month ago. So this is a really tough spot for Blanchfield in short notice. And it opens Andrade minus 190, and you've seen compression. It's going towards Blanchfield, which is very interesting to me. This is, I think Santos was going to be a pretty good step up for Blanchfield. This is another half a step up from that. Is she ready for it? I'd like to think so. She's going to have to rely on her singularly dimensioned ground game, grappling game, her size and her youth against a gal. Again, we just saw what she did against Murphy. Now, there could be a little recency built into Andrade based on what she did to Murphy, who I think is a shot fighter. This is not the same gal as Lauren Murphy, but also Andrade is not the same as Molly McCann. This sets up to be a fascinating fight. Right now, gun to my head, I would bet that the fight starts round 3, minus 140 available at DraftKings right now. That would be a release I would be willing to make as we talk right now on a Tuesday, Dave.
Oh, Lou, that's excellent because, again, you look at the total here. Again, potentially 5-round for a main event fight. Right down the middle here, juiced evenly, minus $1.15 for 2.5. So instead of picking a winner, like you said, maybe inside the decision, what you're looking for is this fight to go into those deeper rounds, at least to start round 3. Is there an advantage for Andrade here? Because normally you think about a 23-year-old fighter versus a 31-year-old fighter, and maybe you want to drag her into deeper waters that she's not accustomed to, and certainly potentially in a 4 or 5-round fight. Does it favor the older fighter, but who's still in her sweet spot at 31 years young, against a 23-year-old to make this a longer fight versus a potentially shorter one?
every interest for this fight to go past a minute and a half belongs to the Blanchfield side as I handicap the fight. Andrade is not, don't take the stripes off a zebra. Andrade is who Andrade is, and she's going to start the motor, and when the motor goes, she's going after it. And it has to be overwhelming, tsunami-like barrage. I believe that's what Blanchfield's going to see. How's she going to handle that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's hard to fight differently now if you're Jessica Andrade. That's the way she knows how to fight coming forward, looking for that knockout for sure. When you look at the co-main event here, Jordan Wright against Zach Pauga right now almost a $3 betting favorite. I'm seeing about minus 275 in the space against Jordan Wright here, plus 230. We know normally what to expect from a Jordan Wright fight. What do you expect from Pauga here as a sizable favorite here in the co-main?
Well, Pauga's really a 205er, and he was cruising around at kind of like Jake Almeida at 225, 230 when he decided to take on the Usman brother of Kamaru, who's a heavyweight and has to cut weight to get to 265. The guy's chiseled out of marble. In any case, what I saw to Pauga in that fight, I liked everything about it. He went right after him. He wasn't afraid. He was striking with him. He was showing up, but he got touched. Now, all Jordan Wright has is early power. He's been finished in his last three. The key to this fight, in my opinion, is that Pauga's moved down now to 205, and he'll rehydrate back to 230. Where Wright was fighting at 185 and now has decided to move back to 205 because the cut may have been too tough for him. I think this is a dynamic mismatch, and I would advise Pauga in every kind of parlay that you could make.
You mentioned Jordan Wright. It feels like 5 minutes, and then if those 5 minutes, if the fight's not already been decided, you wonder what's left here. Speaking of fighters changing their stripes, is there any way that you mentioned the bad weight cuts? Could it be better for him at 205 cardio-wise in case we do get to a second round or beyond?
I don't think cardio is his issue after 4 or 5 minutes, Dave. I think he's from Bel Air. He's the Beverly Hills Ninja. Come on, it's fortitude, and really, I think him carrying to 205, his power is going to transfer, and his length and aggression early, that all fits. So he's got a short window to get this done and catch Pauga. I just think Pauga is just going to be too much and to just mow right over this guy. And I think it's Pauga inside the distance. And you can look at it. Does the fight go the distance? I bet yes is minus 300, 400, 500. So yeah, I don't give Jordan Wright much opportunity here after 4 minutes of what we'll see as a competitive fight.
Yeah, exactly. If you think he goes over 7.5 minutes, just to go over a round and a half, plus 230 to your point, Lou, right? For the fight that go the distance, plus 330. So we're not expecting, at least the bookmakers out here in Las Vegas right now, not expecting this one to go deep into the UFC Apex on Saturday night. I know that there's a fight on this card, the very first fight that you're looking at in a guy like Clayton Carpenter here. What do you make of his introduction here to the UFC at minus 285? You've had your eyes on him. Tell the people about Clayton for those that don't know.
A debuting fighter, really got great size, excellent grappling BJJ game, can strike, well-rounded fighter, the MMA lab. So what does he sharpen his tools with every morning? 4 killers in the bantamweight division: Casey Kenny, Mario Bautista, Sugar Sean O'Malley, and Kyler Phillips. So this is a gym that really excels in bringing young people in, and those 125, 35, 45 divisions, John Crouch does an amazing job with. This kid is talented and good, and he catches a kid been on a long layoff, but the opponent is game, willing. This is going to be a great fight. But at the end of the day, Carpenter's size and his BJJ is going to be way too much. If you can find the inside the distance, which is available right now, just 1 or 2 outfits, it's minus 125. I've already made that play, and I'll make that recommendation now whenever that line comes out. Carpenter inside the distance. I think he has a very good debut here.
Yeah, minus 285 right now here in his flyweight debut. So again, first time with those bright lights of the octagon in the UFC. Because of the people he trains with, Lou, you don't think it'll be too much for him to handle as a big favorite here, almost a $3 betting favorite?
He's been at plenty of the locals, and he's been in the Apex because he's coming from Contender. Yeah, there could be some of that, and maybe he's got some jitters. His opponent has been in a UFC fight, albeit he got overwhelmed, but I still think that the advantage is to the opponent in the experience department, and I think it's good you bring it up.
Very quickly, Lou, I see a bad moon rising. That means Jim Miller is back on this fight card here against Alexander Hernandez. What do you make of Jim's going to be a Hall of Famer whenever he decides to hang him up? Again, almost a $2 betting underdog against Hernandez here, who's a favorite at minus 225.
And then the total is telling to me because I'm thinking Jim Miller, he's durable. All he's got to do is take this kid who gasses out in every fight he has into the second round. So we're going to get a 2.5, and Jim Miller's going to scrape them all over the mat. But we get the 1.5, and that scares me a little bit. Hernandez potency is first 5 minutes, and Jim's a little bit older now, 39 years old. It's going to be a good fight.
Lou, always appreciate your insight as always. Again, check out the Bout Business Podcast, people. They'll have those releases coming for you on Friday. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, Dan Vreeland next here on First Strike on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. DraftKings Sportsbook is giving you plenty of ways to bet the UFC. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. You're going to be able to bet on more than just the main event. DraftKings has great odds on fight lines, total rounds, and futures for all MMA events. Eligibility restrictions to apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for all the terms and conditions. Back here on First Strike, Dave Ross here in Las Vegas. I want to bring in Dan Vreeland. We love talking to Dan each and every week. Again, he is the writer at Gambling Podcast, Cage Side Press, host of Top Turtle MMA and SGPN MMA. This is already Dan's third pod of the day on a Tuesday. You really are the hardest working man in MMA. But Dan, I want to let you know, out here in Las Vegas today, because I know you're back in the East Coast, it's snowing here on a Tuesday, so we're getting some of your weather out here.
Well, I'm glad it's out there and not out here.
Absolutely, Dan. Very quickly, before we look ahead to this week's card, what were your thoughts wrapping up UFC 284? Because, again, it was obviously a great pound-for-pound matchup here. Goes all 5 rounds. In the main event, Islam Makhachev does get the decision against Alexander Volkanovski. Your thoughts? Did you agree with the decision? And what do you make of that mythical pound-for-pound title?
So, in real time, I had scored it for Volkanovski. I had given him the second round as well as the third and the fifth. I think if I probably went back, I was probably seeing it with a little bit of rose-colored glasses because I do like Volkanovski. And nobody wants to see like a close title fight. The 2 first rounds go to the same guy, then it feels like Volkanovski's kind of up against it. Pound for pound is always the silliest conversation you could possibly have because, Makhachev ain't making 45. They aren't ever going to be the same size. So, we can sit here and argue about it all day. But at the end of the day, the voters vote, and we just pretend like we understand it all.
Absolutely. But I think, again, like we talked about it with Lou, what a live dog for a guy that was over a $3 betting underdog in that main event. So, very intriguing UFC 284. Let's get to this card here. And obviously, we'll start off with the main event here because I do want to know your thoughts there when you look at Jessica Andrade against Erin Blanchfield here. Blanchfield feels like the numbers come down. She's taken some of the early money here this week. I wonder where this goes before we get to Saturday night here at the UFC Apex. Andrade, of course, a former champion at 115. A solid favorite, minus $1.65. Short notice for her to take this fight. What do you make of this one? And because of that short notice nature, if you will, do you think this one is a quicker night instead of potentially getting to those championship rounds?
Yeah, so this is a tough one because there's so many facets to break down, right? We have seen Jessica Andrade struggle with takedown defense before. Obviously, not in her last fight. She did really well against Lauren Murphy, but had trouble with Valentina Shevchenko. If you go back to her strawweight days, had trouble with Tisha Torres. Clearly, that's what Blanchfield wants to do. On the other hand, Blanchfield's never fought a striker who looks like Jessica Andrade. So for me, that's already a tough piece to break down. Then you add in the short notice factor of it all, the fact that she's up at flyweight instead of down at strawweight where she said she was going back to. There's just so many things. But at the end of the day, for me, I think the big piece is that Erin Blanchfield not get caught in between striking and grappling, because the people who struggle against Jessica Andrade are sometimes, I think, the people who don't know the direction they want to go. Lauren Murphy really thought she was going to strike and have a good time technically striking with Jessica Andrade. And when it didn't work, she went to the grappling. As long as Erin Blanchfield doesn't make that mistake and she just uses her striking as a means to an end to get to the ground, I actually think her on top of Jessica Andrade is going to be a really difficult proposition for Andrade because, she is a 115 pounder. She does make a 115 pound limit. While she's very strong, I think as long as Erin Blanchfield follows that game plan, I actually think she gets it done with the grappling. And then on top of that, when you say, the fact that it is short notice and you worry about the championship rounds, I don't know that Andrade is going to go out there and knock her out. I definitely don't think she's going to go out there and submit her. I think the longer this fight goes, the more it favors Blanchfield too, being that it's short notice. Andrade has had weight trouble in the past. Like, I think the later rounds are going to benefit her.
Wow, so you look at there, again, via sub, if you think Blanchfield can get her arm raised here 5-1. KOT, KRDQ, a little bit longer proposition there at 7-1. And conversely for Andrade, plus $1.30, because we know that's what she wants to do, right? She wants to strike and use those hands for the fight to go the distance at plus $1.80. When you look at the method of victory, are we going to hit the cards here, Dan? Or you think somebody, whether it's Blanchfield late or Andrade early, can get this potentially done?
I think the odds of this ending inside the distance are probably pretty high. Whether it's Andrade getting tired or Andrade landing one of the big bombs here and having the striking advantage, because she clearly has it. With that being said, I think the over being set at 2.5 is a little bit, with it being even money there or close to even money there. I think that's kind of silly because I do think there is going to be a feeling process out here. And also, if Blanchfield is trying to make this a grind, is trying to make this a tough fight, you might see them spend a round trying to grapple up against the cage and jockey per position. If she does that, which I think ultimately is a smart game plan, I think you're going to see that over hit pretty easily.
All right, so over 2.5 is a good lean there at minus $1.15. We'll see where those numbers go before we get to Saturday. You look back on this card a little bit deeper into it. You look at Philippe Lenz here, a pretty sizable favorite against Ovince St. Preux. So OSP back out there. I always say no country for old men. And we know, Ovince St. Preux is not a youngster anymore at 39, but Lenz is not necessarily spring chicken at 37. What do you make of this fight here in the light heavyweight division?
It's interesting. I think I had written off Philippe Lenz after he had 30 fights canceled or something like that in a couple of years' time. It seemed like he was never going to fight again. He comes back at light heavyweight, and in that fight with Marcin Prachnio, I was all over Prachnio on that fight because I thought for sure, how's this guy going to take all this time off? How's he going to come back down a weight class? And he looked incredible in that fight. He looked like he had refigured out how to fight a different version of himself. He looked good. He looked lean. And for Ovince St. Preux, it's kind of always been the home run or nothing, right? Ovince St. Preux has always needed the knockout shot or the choke on the ground or things like that. And Philippe Lenz, could he be susceptible to getting hit on that? Sure. But I think the way he was crafty against the guy who's also dangerous than Prachnio, I think the way he defended himself in that fight gives me enough confidence to say, yeah, he should be the favorite here. I might not be super enthused about the negative 215 line, but I do think he's got a lot of advantages over OSP here.
You mentioned Prachnio here. Marcin's back in there against William Knight in a fight that's really right now, according to the odds makers, pretty even. Right now, Knight a small favorite, minus $1.15, Prachnio minus $1.05. So are you gun shy now about Marcin after what happened against Philippe Lenz?
I'm going to be honest. I'm pretty gun shy at any fight that has Thick Willie William Knight in it because, man, I don't know if I've ever predicted one of his fights right. In complete honesty here, it seems like I can't get a read on that guy whatsoever. But that being said, gun to my head, you're going to make me pick on this one. I'm actually going to take William Knight here because, yeah, Prognaio gave me a little pause, fighting a guy like Felipe Lins last time and just really not looking like he could find the range. Knight's one of those guys who he's so difficult to peg, but he is so physically gifted. He's so strong. I hated that he went up to heavyweight for that short while. But if you've seen any of his workouts lately, the guy looks like he is back in incredible shape and should make 205 with no problem. So I like that facet of him. I like that it looks like he's really driven for this fight. And I do think the physicality factor here could be a big problem for Prognaio if he gets in his face, if he crowds him up. So I'm looking for that to be the avenue for Thick Willie, for William Knight. But man, dude, that dude is impossible to get.
One of the biggest number on the board here is Mayra Buena Silva. She is a minus 460 betting favorite right now against Lena Landsberg right now. The comeback there, and Lena is about plus 370. Is this properly priced for you in the bantamweight division, or do you think maybe there's some value on the dog here?
Since Mayra Buena Silva came up to bantamweight, she has looked really good. So I think we're seeing that being appropriately lined. I would also say this, Lena Landsberg took time away, had her first child, and when she came back, she really looked tough. She did not look like she was her old self. She looked slower. She looked like she could be dominated in the grappling. I think as a result, it winds up being priced probably correctly here. I think if you're looking to get value on Silva, looking for that sub prop, because I do think she's going to get this to the ground. She's going to look to finish the fight. I think there's probably value there, but I will say, we've seen a few fighters in their first fight back from having children, have a tough time out there. We saw it with Nina Ansaroff or Nina Nunes. We saw it with Mackenzie Dern. And then somewhere around the second or third fight, they really do turn it back around. So it wouldn't totally shock me, but I have a tough time pulling the trigger on somebody who looked that rough last time out.
Absolutely. Dan, when you look at some of the fights in the undercard here in the beginning of the night, you're seeing a lot of $2 favorites, $2.50 favorites. Is there any dog that you really look at maybe earlier on in this card here at UFC Apex that you see some value here on a Tuesday?
Yeah, I really like Themba Gorimbo. He's fighting AJ Fletcher on one of the early fight nights, and you're seeing him just a little bit over $2. And the thing I like about Gorimbo is he low-key has a little bit of wrestling. In fact, that tends to be what he wants to do first. But I actually think he's got a large advantage over AJ Fletcher here in the striking department. Fletcher has got one of the shortest reaches in that division. And seeing Gorimbo strike, he strikes well from distance. Front kicks, push kicks, side kicks, a little bit of oblique kicks. And then in addition to that, his hooks and his straights are really long. So the fact that he's got a long advantage there, I think is going to play really well against AJ Fletcher. All
right, so Luka Gorimbo there, maybe live at over a $2 betting underdog. Dan, appreciate the insight as always, my friend. Enjoy the fights. We'll see you next week. There he is, Dan Vreeland, everybody. When we come back, going to Washington, D.C., Reed Kuhn up next. First Strike here on VSiN. Start your morning with VSiN's newest podcast, VSiN Daily Morning Bets. Josh Applebaum gives you every piece of info you need to be ready for betting the day's biggest games in just 15 minutes. He discusses line movements, injuries, what you need to be looking at before you make those bets. So get some coffee and make the VSiN Daily Morning Bets podcast part of your morning routine. Download and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Dave Ross here, back at Circus Sportsbook here in Las Vegas. Let's go back out to Washington, D.C. Always love catching up with Reed Kuhn each and every week. Of course, he is the author of the book of Fightnomics. And again, very analytically driven. And of course, he has that book, maybe a sequel coming one day, but not yet. So says Reed Kuhn. Reed, I want to get your thoughts on UFC 284 before we look ahead here to this card, because again, that main event, all 5 rounds, pound for pound, a mythical title here. We thought that Volk would be in play as over $3 betting favorite, and certainly gave scares for those who had Islam Makhachev laying that big price tag.
Well, I think you and I both talked about it. The value was on the over in that matchup because while I did agree with Makhachev being the favorite, and I did acknowledge that the size difference could help him, if anything, I also saw that it was much more of an even matchup on paper if we ignore the weight difference. And so Volk definitely lasted. He definitely showed that he was able to win rounds, especially like a really strong final, round 5 that he clearly won. But I do agree with the judges. It was 3-2 on my card, but very close. And yeah, I mean, if they were down at featherweight, I think Volk takes it.
So, and that will leave that argument up for who is, in fact, the pound-for-pound best in the world, because we will never see that fight at 145 pounds. But you and I on that over on 2.5. Cassius Force down under. Let's get to this card, Reed, because it is very interesting, the main event here. Certainly a fighter like Andrade. You've got a lot of data on her, obviously from 115 now up at 125. And Blanchfield feels like a fighter on the rise, and we get that age difference at 23 to 31. Normally, you would think that would favor the younger fighter, but is that actually a disadvantage because you just don't have the volume for a fighter still in her prime, potentially, in Andrade at 31 years young?
Yeah, actually, she is so young. She falls onto the left side of my curve. There's actually a curve I made in the book Fightnomics where I looked at the win rate by age. And when you first get into the UFC, younger fighters actually need to climb the curve a little bit because they are still getting better. They are improving. They're still working on their ground game. They're still getting stronger in some cases. And just finding their right weight class. So there is a bit of a learning curve, and that could work against someone who is this young going into a main event against a former champion. This seems like a big step up. Just look at their resumes. Yeah, I got a ton of data, 200 minutes on Jessica Andrade, and it's against elite talent, title fights, 5-rounders. You got Blanchfield, who has only a handful of fights, 41 minutes of octagon time, and she hasn't faced a single ranked opponent yet. So this just feels like a massive jump in strength of schedule here. And it makes me look at those numbers and say, I'm not just going to go down the list and check off advantages. I need to remember the context that, if anything, Andrade's numbers are deflated or Blanchfield's are inflated because of that.
And again, when you look at the total here, and again, a potentially 5-round fight here, because we try to figure out styles and pathways to victory. We know what Andrade normally does, right? She's going to be that bull in the china shop. She wants to come out and dictate with her hands. Can Blanchfield show the patience where for wrestlers you would want to take it into the deeper waters here, where maybe she could gain an advantage later? But I wonder, deer in the headlights, as you mentioned, main event, you are 23 years old against a veteran former champion. How do you think that dynamic plays out?
The over is going to be tricky here because normally when you have a fight with Andrade, there's a higher level, greater probability of a finish than a typical fight in that division because she is a dual threat fighter. She can do submissions. She can knock people out. She can slam you on your head and win a knockout that way, what she did to Rose. So she is a finisher, but you're right, like a much younger opponent. If we start seeing that really fresh stamina from her, maybe she can turn this into an exercise contest and last into those later rounds. But I just don't know. I just don't have enough data on Blanchfield to make that a confident play. And that's a tricky thing about having a veteran that's very proven and I know what I'm getting versus someone who's brand new. But lining them up side by side, I'm going to go with Andrade here. I think overall that line there's value in her favorite price. And I'm probably going to take that on Saturday.
Absolutely. And again, I love where your numbers take you, right? So if you don't have the data on Blanchfield, you're probably going to steer clear of that. And you look to where the numbers show you have an advantage, and that certainly could be with Andrade here as the smaller favorite. Speaking of volume, when you have data for Fightnomics, boy, do you have it with Jim Miller, right? We know he's going to go to the Hall of Fame one day. That certainly is not in question. But I guess what is in question against Anthony Hernandez here is, Father Time is undefeated. So you have all that great data on Jim Miller. Sounds like he wants to fight forever. We know he can't at 39 years old, and Hernandez here at 30. So whereas that 8-year age difference in the main event feels like it could favor the 31-year-old, is there a possibility to make a case that Miller, with all that extra experience at 39, can it really favor the older guy?
It can. It can in certain situations, and the way it favors the older guy is on the ground. And Jim Miller is one of the best and most seasoned grapplers there is in the game. You talk about sample size, 388 minutes of fight time. That is, I mean, like, I'd be hard pressed to sit down and watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy, start to finish, let alone be fighting in a cage for that long. That's how much experience Miller has, and he's still getting it done. And keep in mind, he actually did have some health problems a few years back that he overcame and improved his diet. So he actually came out of this trough and got better. So this is a situation where if he is keeping it close against the cage, get it down, work his submission game, he can actually leverage that experience. And I think Alexander Hernandez isn't the type of guy who's going to fight, a very strategic fight.
No.
He actually does go out there and gets into brawls sometimes. And so I think that works against him here. So I do see value on the dog. You don't normally see me betting on the much older guy pushing 40. I'm usually the guy very loud about that. But in this case, at nearly 2-1, I see value on Miller.
That's a great point, because you know how Alex Hernandez wants to fight. He likes to be the bully in there, right? He likes to show, I'm the younger guy, I'm the fresher guy, I'm going to try to go in there and get the knockout here. If Miller utilizes the wrestling that you're talking about here, could you see this fight going deeper, potentially all 3 rounds? Is that a possibility here?
Well, Miller's grappling game is very submission focused. Over half of all trips to ground, he's going to attempt at least one submission. So that's when I'm looking at certain metrics, that one pops off the page as abnormally high. So he has an arsenal. He's good enough at locking those in. And while I do think it might take a bit to wear Alexander down in round 1, I could see a round 2 or a round 3 rear naked choke. It's trickier to play the prop here.
Yeah.
I think overall there's a lot of finishing potential, because if Alexander does find that clean shot and land a haymaker, that's the only way he wins. He does have a few knockdowns to date, and above average knockdown rate. So that's how Miller goes down. But overall, more finishing potential than usual. I'm not going to try to play the rounds though.
There it is. Juice to the right now. Over is minus $1.45 for a round and a half. For the fight that go the distance, which is interesting here, is plus $1.65. So that number really flips very quickly once you get past that demarcation line of 7.5 minutes. I do want to ask you, speaking of old men here, we got Ovince St. Preux back in there, and we know he's going to go up against a guy that's not much younger than he is, and that's Philippe Lins. Lins here at 37, and Ovince St. Preux at 39. What do you make of these two old guys thrown down here in the light heavyweight division?
Yeah, mixed feelings. OSP is a former client of mine.
Oh.
So I used to do his scouting reports a long time ago. But this is a fight where actually, you see weapons on both sides. And when St. Preux is on, he is just such a freak athlete. He makes it look effortless. He hits someone so hard, they fall down. And it looked like he didn't even intend to do that. That's how much of an athlete he is. And he also picked up this crazy ground game where he has all these Von Flue chokes that just come out of nowhere that people don't expect from him. So he is dual threat. He can finish fights on the feet and on the ground. The problems that we've seen him, especially as he got older, is his gas tank. He tends to fade in the later rounds, not be able to put up that output. So Lins, probably the more eager wrestler here. St. Preux, could pull one of these, Von Flue chokes from the ground. I mean, that would be fascinating. So tons of finishing potential. But this is one where I see a coin flip, and I'm going to take the plus money value, and barely. Like, this is a fight that I mostly want to stay away from, but I might sprinkle on OSP just for old time's sake, and because I know that he can surprise people.
Plus $1.85. I'm picking up what you're putting down there. Very quickly in the last minute here, another fight that you find some value on here, Reed, when you see on a Tuesday before we get to Saturday?
Marcin Prachnio, and keeping an eye on that one. There's been a lot of price fluctuation. Might take a small stab at him. I'm very worried about the knockout threat that Knight has. But Prachnio, very diverse striker. Lots of kicks, body kicks, leg kicks. He has been in with other sluggers recently and survived. And so his knockdown risk might be from his earlier years. So I'm going to keep an eye on that one. And then Silva versus Landsberg. I just think Silva is better across the board. I think I have enough data to conclude that I believe those numbers, that she is superior on both the feet and the ground. So that's one that could be a parlay anchor for you. She's a heavy favorite, but I believe in that one.
It seems to make sense why she's that big favorite. We appreciate it as always, Reed. We'll catch up again next week. Come on back, Britton Hess next here on First Strike. We continue First Strike here on VSiN. Dave Ross, joined by MMA aficionado. And now a guy that's actually being active on Twitter. Britton Hess, great to have you back behind the glass. And come join me here on the set. You can follow Britton as I do, at Britton Hess. First of all, you were opposed to it for a long time. Now I see you tweeting about fights, and whenever we get there, and Rob Moreno does a great job behind the glass as well, we like to tweet about the fights as they're going on. Is it MMA that pulled you into the deep waters of Twitter?
I think so. I think that it just there's too many bad opinions. I got to weigh in and correct people.
Let them know. Hey, I've been asking everybody on the card for UFC 284. What were your thoughts on the main event down under?
I think that if it was like old Pride scoring, where the old Pride scoring, where who was winning at the end of the fight, was given the victory, then that would have gone to Volkanovski. But I think you can easily see Islam winning 3 rounds there. Okay,
so it seems like fair. Again, across the board here for everybody, we talked about UFC 284, of course, the last pay-per-view last weekend. Islam Makhachev does retain the belt, and it feels like everybody at the end thought it was a close fight, but Makhachev, the rightful winner, 3 rounds to 2. Britton, let's get to this card here. And I know you're looking at a fight here in Zach Palga, who's a minus 275 favorite right now against the Beverly Hills Ninja in Jordan Wright at plus 230. Look, we've talked a lot on this program, and you and I certainly have, about Jordan Wright. And it feels like if it doesn't happen in the first 5 minutes, it normally doesn't happen, right, for Jordan Wright. What about this fight against Palga, who, in his UFC debut, shocked. He was shocked. And now back out there against Jordan Wright. And again, a big favorite, an almost $3 betting favorite.
Well, I think, first of all, any chance we can get to shout out Explode Fight Series, where Jordan Wright made his name, we should, where he, finished guys with 0-14 and 0-22 records before making his way to the UFC. I think we got to call attention to that. But there's a reason why somehow this guy who is 2-4 in the UFC is a co-main event here, Jordan Wright. It's because exciting fights, not the most technical, not, the highest quality, but he goes all out for as long as he can, and somebody gets finished every time, and that's exactly what Dana White wants to see. So that's why he's the co-main event. It's crazy to say, but this is a fight where you could take the alt under half a round prop and take plus money there, 3-4 to 1. And it's dumb, because usually stuff doesn't happen the way you expect it to. But Jordan Wright, hasn't learned from his mistakes yet
at all.
So I don't think we expect him to. And then that's the thing. I think he's a live dog just because he's got all these crazy elbows, crazy kicks. He has some submissions. He'll try to throw him in the worst positions possible, but sometimes he gets them. Palga is all the hype in the world because also that's why he's the dancing partner in this. He's co-main event. And he's 0-1 in the UFC. He got KO'd as a minus 275 favorite against Kamaru Usman's younger brother.
Right.
It's I feel like there's so much variance in this fight that I feel like doing what's safe is probably not the way to go about it. Obviously there's nothing safe in the fight game.
No.
But I think that, Palga is, like I said, there's a lot of hype behind him. He came into the UFC undefeated, lost his first fight as a huge favorite. There's also I would honestly say over 1.5 and under a half. You know what I mean?
Well, because the over right now is plus 230.
Yeah.
Right? If you think it's going to get over 7.5 minutes, the under, you can see why it's juiced at minus 275 because the track record, like you're pointing to, Jordan Wright just does not change his stripes. So it feels like, man, even if it hits the bell, he's going to be exhausted. Yeah. And he's going to come out and survive another 230.
Well, that's so because Palga, he's 5-1 with the 1 loss via KO. He's only got 1 KO victory and he's got 4 decisions. He's a wrestler. So, if he is, if he's got a good coach and says, hey, this guy's going to be trying to hit you with everything from the opening bell, try to get him to the ground and just hold on to him, kind of do what Islam did to Volk, in those middle rounds, then it could go over. That's the thing. It sounds kind of counterintuitive to say under half a round or over 1.5 rounds.
Right.
But that middle 5 minutes there could be a lot of stalling. That's what I see.
So it could be live and then maybe lock in those plus prices at, minus, if you want to go for a quick knockout here in the first 2 minutes and 30 seconds of the fight of round 1. And also the over if it doesn't. Now, you got a small 5-minute window. You got to survive there if you try to take those big plus
exactly.
prices.
Hopefully, you can hit one of them. You'll either make money quickly or you'll know where you're headed pretty early in the fight.
Britton, we normally, when you look at heavyweight fights, right, you normally don't think overs. But you've identified one here that you think maybe Josh Parisian in his fight, that maybe this could be the type that you look at an overplay?
Well, everybody who's, a casual fan or whatever and betting up for fun on Saturdays and say, oh, heavyweight's got to go for inside the distance, got to go for the KO. Right. But, Josh Parisian's a guy that will go the distance. He only has 2 decisions. But, one of those is in UFC against a guy, Roque Martinez, who's not exactly a high-level guy, and I don't necessarily think Jamal Pogues is a high-level guy either. Maybe he will be eventually, but he's a guy that took two chances in the Contender Series to get his contract, and those were both decision wins, which is why he had to run it back and do another. Because, if you get a flash KO, flash submission, then you'll get your contract. If you have kind of a boring decision, they sometimes make you run it back, and he did, and he got another decision, and they're like, all right, well, we can't keep him out for winning 2 Contender Series matches. I think it's kind of crazy too that Pogues is like a favorite in this fight, just because Parisian's been in there a long time,
a sizable favorite too.
Yeah, and I don't know what his, he's 4 KOs, 1 sub, 4 decisions. And like I said, 2 of those are in the Contender Series, which isn't exactly the highest level of MMA.
Yeah.
I don't think Parisian's going to be intimidated by him, and I think it's kind of disrespectful. So like if I had to choose a side, I would go Parisian. This fight going the distance is -125. How often do you see that in a heavyweight fight?
Very
That's telling you
rarely.
something right there.
And again, like we just had Reed Kuhn on, and Reed goes, Fightnomics, analytics, right? His numbers lead him. I think what you do so well, Britton, is you really do look back at the opponents. Because I think sometimes people fall in love with records and they don't look at who these people actually fight. And so, like a Jordan Wright, for instance, as you outlined there, it really does behoove a better to look back and see who did you get these numbers against before I'm going to lay potentially $2, as you mentioned, against Parisian.
Exactly. It's strength of schedule is an underrated metric in
really
UFC,
is.
and it's also the hardest to really quantify because, like I said, I was talking about Jordan Wright's experience in Explode MMA. You and I could probably get a fight in that organization this weekend if we wanted it.
I don't want it. Depends what it pays. Let's talk a little bit about Alex Hernandez, because I know you and I have been burned in some of his fights in the past against Jim Miller. And look, if you've been betting on MMA, you've probably won a lot betting on Jim Miller through the years. This guy's going to be a Hall of Famer for sure. And you've probably been on the wrong side when you're 35-16 like Jim Miller is. But now he's almost a $2 betting underdog against Alex. We know Hernandez wants to come out quickly in this fight and use that 9-year advantage he has at being 30 versus the 39-year-old Miller. How do you see this fight playing out?
When I heard this matchup before there was lines, before anything, I was like, okay, probably about to pick him, right? Because Hernandez, he's got good highlights, but he's also got the thing where it's like he tries to bully you early. And if he doesn't get the early finish, he gets that lactic acid in his arms and he doesn't quite throw as hard as fast as he was earlier in the fight. And Jim Miller has been putting together a good second half to his career. It's
amazing.
He's got 3 KOs in a row, including one against Donald Cerrone, who's obviously aging as well. But Alexander Hernandez isn't a tip of the spear guy. I don't think Jim Miller is going to be worried about it, and I don't think we worry about Jim Miller's gas tank. But we know he's durable. I just think that this fight, I think that Miller is probably more likely to get a KO than Hernandez in this situation. Funny enough, Miller hasn't been KO'd since 2018 against Dan Hooker. You know what I mean? Like he's got a good chin and he knows how to defend himself. So I just think that these odds are kind of off, and I bet we see this compress a little bit when we get closer to fight time.
What's interesting too is you look at the prop there for the fight just to go the distance at plus $1.65, and that's where I was kind of leaning. And then when we talked to Reed Coon, and he mentions the finishing potential of Miller when he gets a fighter down to the ground, and you mentioned Hernandez, how he will gas and those arms won't be the same. Is there danger for people who want to bet that plus money that we go and this one hits the cards?
Yeah, I don't think we're seeing this one hit the cards. Just the way that both these guys, one Miller fights for the finish because he's a veteran. He knows that's why he's been in the UFC as long as he has, because he has exciting fights and finishes are exciting. And Alexander Hernandez, just look at his last fight against Billy Quarantillo. With 4:30 into the second round, he got TKO'd because he gassed. And in the first round, his live odds were probably -500 because he was, laying it on him.
Look great.
But guess what? Quarantillo was expecting that, weathered the storm, and came back and, took advantage of it. So I don't think this goes the distance unless they get in some sort of a wrestling stalemate situation for a round or two. But yeah, I think Miller is definitely undervalued here. I bet money comes in on him. And yeah.
1 minute to go. I got to get your thoughts on the main event. Let's get to Andrade against Blanchfield here. Again, you and I talked about it a little bit before we started First Strike today, and you look at the younger fighter by 8 years younger at 23 versus the ultra experienced Jessica Andrade. but she is taking the fight on short notice. How do you break down this main event?
Well, Blanchfield's been a huge favorite in all of her UFC fights before this, and now she's a dog against a fighter who's coming up in weight on short notice. I mean, Andrade is kind of like a female Volk as far as her build. Fire hydrant, short stature, hard to get a takedown on someone who's that low to the ground with center of gravity. But the thing is, we all look at there's a 6-inch reach advantage for Blanchfield in this, and that matters when you've got the style that Blanchfield has, which is some big. She can grapple, but she can also strike from the outside. So I feel like it's tough for Andrade to get close to her and impose her will. I think that I think there's value on Blanchfield. I just don't necessarily want to rush to date Andrade because she's such a veteran. Her method of victories, she's drawing a straight with 9 decisions, 8 KOs, and 7
Gotta go,
subs.
Britton. Great stuff as always. Thanks for watching First Strike here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.